Welcome back to OurTribe, the podcast. I'm Tuvia Kopstein, and in this episode, we're going to meet Chanan Simon. Chanan is the proprietor of a chain of cannabis retail stores in the Seattle area, and Chanan is going to tell a story about how he grew up as a hippie, and then went to Israel, and then got involved over there, and then came back and entered the real estate space, retail real estate space, got into what he's doing now, and also he's going to talk about his nature camping. If you don't know what I'm talking about, find out by watching the episode. OurTribe, the podcast, is a project of the Podcast Fellowship, podcastfellowship.org. Check it out. It's a way that Jewish young adults can connect to mentors through learning Torah, discussing what they're learning, and earning a stipend each time. Podcastfellowship.org. I want to thank Itai, our mutual friend, for sponsoring this episode with Chanan. And now, enjoy OurTribe, the podcast, with Chanan Simon.
Welcome to OurTribe, the podcast that sits down with Jewish professionals and entrepreneurs to hear their stories, share their advice, and bare their Jewish souls.
Glad to be here with Chanan Simon. How are you, Chanan?
Baruch Hashem, great.
It looks like you're in a beautiful setting out there.
It's a beautiful set. Beautiful set over here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm out in the forest on the ocean right now. So it's a good convergent zone of land and water and air.
I'm jealous. I wish I could be in such a relaxing atmosphere, but I'll just have to do it vicariously through you, and you'll experience that from me.
You look relaxed, so that's good.
Okay.
That's what we're here to do, is to chill out together a little bit. So if I can bring a little chill in, let's do it.
Nice. Okay, so Chanan, you're in the cannabis retail space, and as I understand it, that is your main thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I run 3 cannabis stores in the Seattle area, and it takes most of my time dedicated to running those stores. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. And you're also doing, as I understand, you're also doing some other interesting thing with camping and Glam-Camping. Maybe we'll get to that. Okay.
Love to.
Okay. So tell us your story. How did you get into the cannabis business? Where did you come from?
So I'm a Seattle native, and I think it was 2013, Washington, Seattle's in Washington for all of you East Coasters. Washington and Colorado were the first states to have a ballot initiative to legalize cannabis, which passed. And every
Can you
state
give us the
has
time
done.
frame? When was the
This is like 2013.
Oh.
Maybe it was on the ballot in 2012 or something. It passed in 2013, and by 2014 they were issuing licenses. And every state that has legalized since then always has an interesting way of distributing licenses. And Washington, they did a lottery, which isn't uncommon, that people put in applications for the lottery, and then I'm not sure how they do it. They do it like Powerball or something like that. I'm not sure how the lottery works, but you get chosen for the lottery. So I put a few applications in for properties that I had familiarity or ownership in that were conforming to all of the specific zoning things. That was a lot of work to figure out what properties actually could house a cannabis shop. And I actually didn't win. My application was withdrawn, and 2 of them didn't win, and then one of them was withdrawn. And I had great record keeping, that I had submitted everything properly, and I had confirmations from the Liquor and Cannabis Board. And so I actually brought them to court, and they said, you can have a new lottery. So they gave me a lottery again. I don't know what that consisted of, and that fake new lottery I won. And so I opened my first shop in a smaller town called Bremerton, Washington, which is just a ferry ride away from Seattle.
It's across the bay or the sound or whatever they call it.
Across the sound. Yeah, exactly. Puget Sound.
Okay. Got it. So you opened up there around 2013, 2014?
2014, I think, or 2015 we opened, right at the end of 2014.
So what did it take to open up a cannabis store? Like what goes into the research and development and the branding, and let us. Give us
Well,
insight.
this started as a passion project for me. I did not see it becoming a full-time job when I entered the cannabis space. I had won the license because it was more of like a real estate deal for me. Like, hey, maybe I'll get a license in a shop, and then I'll find somebody really cool to like run the shop and maybe build out this business, and it'll be a nice entrepreneurial side gig. And I even thought maybe I'll just sell the license.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, it was hard to sell, and it was hard to find a manager. And so I've spent more and more time sort of cultivating the business, and then I've opened a second and third store since then. The genesis of me deciding, hey, I'm not going to sell this, hey, I want to have more involvement, is I kind of came up with a retail concept. I'd spent a lot of time before building out retail spaces for other retailers. My concurrent and former careers in real estate.
Okay.
So it was fun to imagine, like, what should a cannabis store look like? What should it feel like? How are we going to make it fun? How are we making it reflect the cannabis culture? And so I got really excited and enthusiastic about that. And that's sort of like what pulled me in more and more, was the store design, creating the vibe, creating the experience for the customer. And so that's what I did. I built the stores out and just became more and more involved from that point.
What is the vibe that you're trying to create?
When I set out, it was really important to me to create, our store is called The Reef.
The Reef.
The Reef. Kind of like from the reefer, obviously. There's a nice remiz there.
A hint to the concept.
A hint, yes. But the idea of a reef to me was like a place that you can go. It's adventurous. It's a place where you can think. You can be, not tied down. A lot of reefs have really cool, interesting things to look at, and so it's very engaging. So the idea was to create a shop that really inspired, like, curiosity into different products.
Do you have fish tanks in the stores?
We had thought about doing fish tanks.
I'm not so original.
Yeah, fish tanks are very hard to upkeep, and it just becomes another job, and there's a lot to manage in the cannabis space, so we weren't looking for pets in addition to products.
Got it. And did you put that with that vibe when you created the vibe of interesting things to look at, like your scuba, you're snorkeling around a reef? Did you came up with some? Yeah, am I right? It's something along those lines. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, we have actually some really cool images of sort of Pacific Northwest reefs with a lot of sea creatures, which are really bright and colorful, surprisingly, for out here where it's very gray. And then we intersperse like buds, like if you were in the water and you like saw like little cannabis plants down below. So it's like kind of this cool mixing of worlds. And then interestingly enough, we later for our second shop, I met a tenant of mine who told me that he was like the world record keeper of a very famous diver, actually the first person who created the diving tank called the Iron Lung, I think it was called. Really? His name is Jacques Cousteau. Sure. And he was a marine biologist diver, and it happened to be a tenant of mine, has been the clearinghouse for all things from his family that send him stuff. So he has the first, he has an Iron Lung or one of the first dive suits and all this stuff. And I was like, you have Jacques Cousteau's stuff? Jacques was like a childhood hero of mine. I was so enthusiastic. So in our second shop, we actually did a huge mural of Jacques Cousteau, and really, he became a real inspiration for that store.
He let you use some of that vintage original material from original diving suits. Is that what you're saying?
We chose not to in the end because we weren't doing a dive shop, and people are confused enough sometimes by the reef. So we have a few, again, ramuzim, which are, hints to the dive, culture, but it's more a cannabis experience.
Very good. When you opened, were you the first one in the area? You're the first store in the area?
No, because I had to get mine after that lawsuit. That took about 8 months or something. So I was actually quite a bit behind the first wave of openings.
Do you find that it's difficult to compete for the same customers, and you're always having to coming up with marketing and deals and offers to try to get an edge?
Very much so.
Oh,
very much so. It's what I like least about the industry, honestly.
What do you like most about the industry?
I like the fact that it's a new industry, and so there's still a lot of things that haven't been tried, and that you're dealing with newly minted entrepreneurs, and people are excited about getting into the industry. Employees, people are coming from different places from the country because they want to get involved in a industry that is very meaningful to them. They're passionate about it, and I like the pioneering nature of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask you, let's take it back a little bit. You mentioned that you're in real estate and you have prepared retail spaces for other people. Of course, we want to get at your Jewish story because we are OurTribe, the podcast. Let's start. Can we start from the beginning and talk about how you got into real estate and what kind of family you grew up in?
Sure. But I'm curious what type of family you grew up into. Am I allowed to ask you questions, or is this just like a
You could,
one-way
but
conversation?
you're not going to get any answers until I become the guest,
Okay, I can't turn the mic on you.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a Jewish home. We were Jewishly identified,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a bar mitzvah and a Reform synagogue. And then I decided that I didn't want to go back to synagogue much after that, so I didn't. And it became less and less meaningful and relevant to me from age 13 to when I took my first trip to Israel when I was 21. And I think what had happened was that I was referencing Jewish topics from a very young age, little arts and crafts projects in Sunday school. I didn't have anything really meaningful to latch onto as I hit adolescence and was growing as a human. There was nothing that was maturing with me in a Jewish context, partially because I dropped out and wasn't going back to school, but partially because it wasn't being communicated in a way that was really resonating.
I think that's a very typical problem of American Jewry of our generation. You're older than me, but
yeah, I think it might have changed a little bit. I sense that kids have a little bit more connection to other, to conservative and reform movements now. Some do, and probably some don't. But I think in our generation in particular, we had a very elderly rabbi. We had it didn't feel like a very deep or spiritual or compelling community to me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to Israel when I was 21, I was shocked at how compelling and interesting, dynamic, and deep everything was, because I didn't expect it at all. Mm-hmm. I was curious about what was in Israel. I was curious that I was part of this tribe, but man, it hit me so hard, like immediately when I started walking the streets the first morning. And yeah, it's still, every time I think about Israel, even though I live there now, part of the time, it's just landing in Israel. I mean, leaving Israel, walking the streets of Israel, I can still sometimes just spontaneously tear up and start crying. Just because how dynamic and multifaceted our people are. I got off the subway in Tel Aviv a year or so ago, and just kind of get up into like the downtown core with these huge buildings and car dealerships, and financial centers, and then the train system and the culture and the people zooming past, and I just was like, wow, Mikam Yisrael, like how incredible that we've come so far and we're doing this together. And it hit me when I got to Israel, like this is a project we're all invited to engage in.
It's so amazing because I had At right about the same age, I had a very similar experience. But that was the first
Oh,
time I was
good.
21, the first time I went to Israel, and and that was a real life changer for me. But it sounds like you're telling me that you were really taken by the diversity of Jewish people that you saw all working together to build up something which was this modern country.
Yeah, that was one element.
Oh, okay.
But definitely another element was I started taking classes, Torah classes, also very soon after I got there. And the first real rabbi that I feel like I met was Noah Weinberg, who was the founder of Asia Torah. And I was transported to a different cosmos, really. I'd never met a person with such enthusiasm and simcha, joy, and wisdom. And I was shocked at that wellspring existing in my own culture. I had done a fair amount of touring spiritual cultures in the couple years leading up to getting to Israel. And so I had enough comparison, enough of a lens of comparison that this was by far so much more attuned to my neshama, to my soul. Very practical, very like caring, and very deep. Just a lot of concepts that I didn't realize were in the Torah. It's like reincarnation, stuff I just had never heard that came from the Torah, different
Mhm.
spiritual concepts about what the soul is and how the body and the soul work together. How each of us, has a mission um, and motivating factors behind humanity, how all that is presented in Jewish context and how it's seen in the teachers, to me it was it was mind blowing.
How did you get connected with with the Aisha Torah and Rabbi Weinberg what was the context of the trip? How did you get there?
I I took a year off. I spent 6 months traveling Alaska and then living on some islands in Washington.
Okay.
And then I spent the next 6 months, I wanted to go to Europe. And on my trip up to Alaska, I was in a VW camper van. I went up with a dear friend of mine, and he had gone to Israel. He had just gotten back. And he was like, "You shouldn't go to Europe. You have to go to Israel. It is, um, you know, just went on and on about how much he loved Israel." And he convinced me that it makes sense to go and check out my tribe.
Hmm.
So that was the
So it was an independent trip. It wasn't a guided trip with
independent. I
everybody.
was all by myself. Yeah,
So how did you wander into the yeshiva?
exactly like that.
You just wandered.
I was wandering around the old city, and I literally just like dead ended. It used to be Asian Tour used to be like on a little ramp where you could like actually dead into it,
Uh,
and I dead ended into it, and I was like, huh, I wonder what this is. And I walked around. I was, it's a pretty big hippie back then, so I was wearing like necklaces and like a sheepskin hat I made myself, and I had like I think I cut my hair by then, but yeah, I was representing the hippie culture in America pretty well when I got there.
did you spend some time learning there or just a few conversations with the rabbi?
I spent a little time learning there.
Uh-huh.
I was very lucky that the Shabbos after I got there, so I had one Shabbos in Yerushalayim, and then I was hanging out with some hippies, and they were like, "Hey, we're going to this moshav for the next Shabbos, and it's a holiday." And I was like, "All right, cool." So I went with them, and it was the Shlomo Moshav, and it was Purim, and it was a Shabbos. It was like Shushan Purim or something. So I forget how it all laid out. I think it was Purim, then it went into Shabbos, Right, exactly. The
right?
Purim, it went into Shabbos. So I had an amazing Purim there. It was like, what a great holiday to get introduced to the Shlomo Karlibach Moshavniks. If
This was after he had passed away. This is
this was the year after.
So we're
He
talking
had
for
just
the
passed away the Cheshvan before.
So for those watching who do not know, we're referring Hanan over here is referring to Rav Shlomo Carlebach, who had a sort of village, who established a village
Yeah,
with followers, and he was a beloved spiritual teacher who was also very musical, and so he created a sort of musical Jewish culture of,
yes.
is that correct? Right. And Hanan had the opportunity to visit that village, Moshav Modi'in, right? Moshav Modi'in, is that what they
hmm
call it? Yeah.
hmm Yep,
And shortly after Rabbi Karlbach had passed away, and he got that whole experience of was like hippie culture with Judaism coming together, sort of, correct?
exactly. Basically, Shlomo Karlibach went to Haight-Ashbury, which was the heart of the hippie scene in San Francisco in the 60s. And he actually was very fascinating. He was actually spending a lot of time in Lubavitch, and Lubavitch Rebbe actually sent him on, wanted him to go to college campuses and start to teach kids. And so Shlomo got a guitar and started singing to these students, and he had a real powerful aura.
Mm.
And somehow, from there, just realized it was his mission in life to really bring this musical joy and deep, wonderful lessons of like Torah to people who were really looking at a lot of different spiritual systems. Buddhism was really big back then, and so he went to San Francisco in the 60s, and he opened a village there. It was a big house. It was called the House of Love and Prayer. And he started doing Shabbat and had an open door policy. And all of these Jews who were really drawn to the hippie scene for sort of the communal, spiritual, the uplifting aspects of it, he opened up sort of like a welcome center, and was extremely touched a lot of people's lives. And a lot of those students that he made in Haight-Ashbury went to Israel, and he and his students opened up this village. So it's very much like 60s San Francisco transposed over to the Judean hills,
Uh-huh.
and it's wild. It's awesome. It's amazing.
Did the Lubavitcher Rebbe send him specifically to San Francisco?
No,
Oh, okay.
he
That would
sent
be a big.
Shlomo Karlebach and a rabbi called Salom Schachter, who now has a Buddhist Jewish center in Boulder. He said they were both like chavrusas
Hmm.
and learning at Lubavitch frequently. And Lubavitch Rebbe said they're both the college campuses, and they both from there, went their own directions into other uh, leadership positions, different places.
Yeah. Okay. So then how did that translate back into the real estate, the real estate world, which may seem a little stuffy and not spiritual? What was the next step?
I learned in Israel for about 6 months, and then I came back to finish up college, which was my plan, to take the year off. I did a couple other stints in Israel, and by the time I graduated college, I developed a real strong personal identity as a Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Torah mitzvot. I was very observant, um, and but I wasn't around a really big community. I was in Seattle, where it
Mhm.
was a pretty small community. And he asked me about how to get into real estate. So I'd finished up school, and my father had a couple buildings that he was managing, and I went with him. He and I weren't talking very much because I was like this Orthodox hippie now. He didn't really know where to place me, and I didn't have much that I could could discuss with him. I was like in a whole different world. Um, and one of my rabbis in Seattle had a very sage advice. He said, "You know what? Ask your father to teach you something." And I did. I asked my dad to teach me something, and it ended up fusing into me going with him for a few days down to check on his properties. And I found it really, really cool. He was like fixing up buildings and meeting with tenants. Our relationship and work didn't last very long. It lasted about a year. And then he and I both decided we were better working on our own. And I went out and started my own business, doing very similar things to what he had done. He taught me a lot in that year. Like it was the best advice maybe I ever got, was to learn something from my father. It changed. I had no thought of going into real estate. And then that sort of, aligning with my father for that year and really learning from him, it was a powerful time in our relationship, and served me really well. I went out afterwards and started pulling together investors and putting together partnerships to buy buildings, fix them up, get new tenants in them, and either sell or hang on to them.
And so you were dealing with multifamilies, or you're dealing with retail space, or what were you exactly?
Retail, office, warehouse, commercial. No multifamily. I was much more interested in working with businesses, and tenant improvements is something I really like doing, which is where a tenant will come and say, "Oh, we want to do, a cafe here or a restaurant," and then you can really work with them to design their space. And that was the dynamic I really enjoyed in real estate.
Okay. So while you are back from Israel and now learning the ropes of the real estate world with your father and then going off with your own, how many years are we talking about until you started going into the cannabis retail space?
It was about almost 15 years.
15
I was in
years.
real estate for about, I mean, I'm still in real estate, but I was, no ideas of cannabis even becoming legal for all that decade plus.
Right. How was your Jewish connection? Did you remain the hippie, but now you just took it into the real estate world?
Yeah. I still very much feel that hippiehood to this day. I feel like a free spirit, and I feel like
Great. So
I don't dress like a hippie anymore, and
no, you don't.
And I don't do a lot of the things hippies do anymore. But in terms of being a free spirit, listening to a lot of rock and roll, jam band music, listening to, reading a lot of Shlomo Carlebach, and trying to stay close to his chevra, his community. All of that is very. That's where my neshama is at.
Interesting. So let me ask you like this. Tell me about the cannabis space. I think there's a perception, at least there was, I guess the conservative, I don't mean conservative Jewish, but the conservative look on drug use and legalizing of drug use. Like the conservatives always voted against it, and the liberals always voted for it. And there was that legalize it, don't criticize it was a reggae song I remember growing up. And like it's seen upon by the establishment as something that's destructive to society. And then I guess I'm asking you, like, how do you see the role of the legalizing of certain drugs as, or what's considered drugs, as contributing to society? Is it just something you do for business? It sounds like it's more than that. It sounds like it's something that you believe in. So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Ever since I started using cannabis in high school, it was always a dream that it would become legalized. It always seemed like it was something that was very it wasn't very harmful, and in certain cases it had a lot of benefit in different times in my life. And just looked at in relationship to other drugs, many of which are legal, cannabis has never seemed like a particularly threatening drug. You know, I think most people know it's not as addictive as alcohol. It has it's not nearly as damaging as many other drugs, especially when you start looking at a lot of the other things which are, you know, practically illegal these days on the streets, especially in Seattle and stuff. So, so I always was a fan of legalizing it. So it seemed like a real great opportunity and dream when it was becoming legal to get involved in the industry. Having seen it legalized, I'm not as enthusiastic about how I see it being, how I see people self-medicating with it. I don't think there's enough education around cannabis use now. There's a lot of tax dollars flowing in from stores like mine. And I mean, I think Washington might have like $500 or $600 million of tax revenue from cannabis. There's very little education. It's 47% tax in Washington.
Wow.
47% tax.
That's on the consumer or on the retailer?
It's on, I mean, everybody pays.
You split it.
It gets paid. It's not split. It's included in our pricing. So I guess you could say it's on us, but ultimately our prices would be a lot less if we didn't have a 50% tax. So it's on both.
Got it.
So there's a lot of tax revenue coming in, and they promised good education, but I don't really see good education out there. And unfortunately, what I see is a lot of people using cannabis without good boundaries, without good setting, without good intention. And well, I still think, you know, people have a right to do that, and it's certainly not as bad as the people who are using fentanyl on the street and killing themselves. And for some people, cannabis does help with things like these days, like anxiety, which is a huge pandemic in America. But sometimes cannabis increases people's anxiety too. I see that happening a lot. It increases people's anxiety. I see that all the time with my employees and other people who, you know, I know well. And so I think the education is a really important part that's been overlooked in terms of like, how can this, you know, health aid help us in managing our society's ills now. I think cannabis has a lot to offer, but I don't think people have a lot of instruction.
Got it. And you feel that that's the government's, because of all the tax laws going in, that's the government's burden to provide, or obligation to provide, let's say?
Yeah, I think, I mean, certainly that's what they said they were going to do with a lot of the money.
Right.
So I think that they do have an obligation. I think that the stores have an obligation to do it too, but it's hard being a retailer trying to sell something and at the same time tell people like, hey, don't buy too much of it, because, you know, with a 50% tax and a lot of competition, you're trying to sell as much as you can. And to me, that's a very difficult part of being in the industry. Like, I'm not here to be a drug dealer or a pusher, you know, trying to increase my, you know, the amount of cannabis being consumed. On the flip side, I am in the business, and I am trying to improve my bottom line, which means improving my top line. So it's a, you know, that causes me some consternation.
I hear it. I didn't know this. Very interesting for me. So tell me about that other stream of business that you're into now, which is the camping. What is that exactly you're doing, and how did you get into it?
Like a lot of the opportunities that I have entered into cannabis, a lot of the buildings that I have are similar to this. There was a very good opportunity presented. It presented itself as a real estate opportunity where a friend of mine introduced me to a really spectacular piece of oceanfront property next to the Olympic National Park. And I bought it as a just to Airbnb. There's a couple cabins on it. I was going to Airbnb a couple cabins. And soon after I bought it, I learned about this platform called HipCamp, which is basically like Airbnb for campgrounds. And I had a number of sites here that would really work well for camping. And so it was a way to connect directly with campers, like who need a place to sleep for the night. And we opened up, this way we have 5 different sites, and then we built another structure out here. So we have, every weekend, like anywhere from, 20 to 30 people camping and enjoying this beautiful piece of property. And so I'm sort of like a nature guide here. Allows my hippie side to come out a little bit. I provide, just introductions to the land and try to keep everything really, I call it Aliyah Preserve. So it's a land that I'm trying to preserve and bring people to appreciate really spectacular natural environment. Things are just really untouched here. And it's a real privilege and blessing to be able to share this with other people.
That's where you are right now as we're recording? You're in one of those properties? Very nice.
Yeah.
And when you say you try to educate and introduce people, that means that you're actually interacting with the people that are renting the campsite?
Yeah, I go around and introduce myself, and some people I'm hands off with. They seem to want that, and other people are really interested in how this place came to be. And a lot of the people think that I've done a lot more than I have here, and I explain, no, this is all the creator. I decide more what not to do than what to do here. And I really want the untamed, unmanicured nature of this to come through. And it does. I've created spaces for people, like a meditation space, and we call the whole walk to the beach the sacred lowlands. And it's a very spiritual experience being out here. I get a lot of feedback from our guests that they felt very like the sacredness of the place, and the how much they feel the spirit that we're sharing through it, which is really great. I mean, I didn't ever expect people to really get those subtle cues and really bring them to a spiritual place when they're out here, or it's just coming out with their coolers and drinking and anybody. Really, people transform here and really become connected to the creator in a whole different way.
Now, I'm going to put my own 2 cents into this. I also grew up for much of my younger years, and I'm still young, but much of my formative years were around the hippie community. I'm from Northern California, Sonoma County. So, my friends were into the Grateful Dead and Fish. And like these were, I think in a previous discussion, you mentioned that this was your jam, right?
Those are my peeps. Yeah.
Those are your peeps.
Those are my peeps. Those are my peeps.
Right.
I want to meet your friends.
And they still are.
A round table. And when you do the Grateful Dead podcast, I want to be on that one too.
I'm sure
the Grateful Dead round table.
I'm sure there is one.
No, but the from Grateful Dead.
That one.
That one, yeah.
The Orthodox or whatever Torah observant
Grateful Dead crowd. Yeah, there's a lot of us out there. A lot.
Funny enough, as an aside, I won't tell you in which city, but I was once in a city where a Rosh Kollel, the head of a kollel of a very respectable Torah institution, where there's married men who are spending their whole days learning, and they get paid a minimal stipend just to involve themselves in the learning of Torah and the spreading of Torah. So the Rosh Kollel had bought a cheap, I think it was a Ford Focus, a used car, and it had he never took the sticker that the car came with off the car. And he was like a guy, a respectable rabbi dressed in a suit and tie with, and his and on the back were the bears, the dancing bears. Nobody knew.
He had
Nobody knew
no
what it
idea.
meant. It just,
That was a sign.
yeah, the dancing bears.
Whenever I pass those cars, I try to look in the window, and I can imagine if I had passed that car and looked in the window and saw this rabbi there, I would have been like, "Whoa, stop! We gotta go get coffee.
Yeah.
Let's go have a joint together."
I assure you, he didn't know what it meant. So anyway,
Well, there's plenty of rabbis who look just like that, who do know
oh,
exactly what
okay.
it means. So don't be fooled.
Okay.
But yes, what were you going to say?
No, so the kind of the epiphany that happens as a younger person, a young adult who comes and encounters classic Judaism, Torah Judaism, and then filters it through his own soul, her own soul, and says, where do I fit, and where do my experiences fit in this, and how do I stay me and go into this and incorporate this? So the general understanding I have is that the hippies, like it's the spirituality that's not grounded. It's chasing that the moment of beauty and truth, and chasing the high and chasing that going to the next concert, following your band around and getting that high, and maybe definitely enhanced by drug use, but it doesn't actually turn the person into it's not grounded. It doesn't turn the person into a productive person, or into a person who's necessarily on the right track with interpersonal relationships, with relationship to oneself, with relationship above, all those three playing fields of man and God, man and oneself, and man and other man. So that's the impression, and that's where I see Judaism plays a role in guiding us, how it can be spiritual, how it can get to that, pursue beauty and truth, but yet be guided and grounded. So my question is, like, what's your perspective on this? And am I right? Why am I asking this? I'm not asking for confirmation if I'm right. I'm asking, when people come to your campgrounds and you're telling me they find a connection with Creator, but where does that go afterwards? Does that improve their lives? Does that make them a better husband, wife, father, mother, son, daughter? What does it do for them?
Um, I think that people are entitled to their encounter with the the Creator in their own ways, and that is a invaluable encounter, no matter what happens afterwards. I try to spend time outdoors and exploring and really enjoying the nature in a way that I feel like I'm encountering the Creator. It's interesting that one of the names for God is Elokeinu, which is the numerical value of Hateva, which means nature. So we see a sort of a clear connection to how God manifests in this world, the laws of nature, and the natural world is very much a channel, a manifestation of God, that we're able to see God in creation. So I think just that is invaluable. And then, yeah, you're right. The question is, so what? So Azma, now what? And in Judaism, we have a lot of ways to channel that into very practical ways that make this inspiration manifest in our own lives. So having that ability to have a relationship with God, some people have that in the natural world, people have all different ways of relating to God. Obviously, Torah is a way, it's a direct connection where we can sit and we can learn, and that's really our most immediate and direct connection to that's the miracle of Torah, is that no matter where we are, we can always bring Torah into our lives. And even though it might seem very abstract, like we don't really get it But that just sitting down and learning Torah is our direct connection to Hashem.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other ways that people connect to Hashem, and going out into nature is a way that people connect to Hashem. So what do we do with that? What do we do with the Torah that we learn? We have mitzvot. We have things that bring us back to, okay, so now then how do I exactly, very precisely turn this into something which has its place in my behavior, the other people, my Torah cover, or mitzvot cover, the way that I eat, the way that I speak to people, the way that I sleep, the way I wake up in the morning, the way I do business. All of those things are extremely like governed in the best ways by Torah. So it's really important in my life, personally, have moments of expansion, be able to come out and to really try to have the experience of singing, beautiful Grateful Dead song or beautiful old shtetl song in the middle of nature, and feel like I'm really pouring my soul into my relationship with the Creator. And then in no way is there any contradiction. That just fuels my ability to come back and do the mitzvot that we do, whether that's Shabbat, which is amazing, and is a way that we really bring spirituality right down to our family, to the heart of our family, the dinner table. Davening, work is filled with things that we are guided by in terms of mitzvot, how we treat how we work with other people, what's considered stealing, what is charging interest to people is a big one in the real estate world. So there's so many different ways that we sort of create a reality of Torah in the way that we behave. And not everybody has that. Not everybody has that great side of the hippie Shlomo community and the very practical applications of it in the Torah and mitzvot. So we're lucky. I mean, we have both sides.
Nice.
That's how you can build Tel Aviv and Yerushalayim, with the same builders, with the same minds. You have Tel Aviv, you have Yerushalayim, and they really are very similar when you look at the heart of the Jewish people. There's something very unique about the Jewish people that makes them think big, dream big, and have the practical sense to accomplish their dreams. And we're seeing that like never before right now. We're seeing a lot of challenges too right now, but we're seeing the Jewish people really stand out as leaders in the crazy world that we have right now.
Chanan, what parting thoughts would you like to give to young Jewish people who are starting to learn Torah? Maybe everyone's at a different stage, connecting, trying to connect, understanding. What, as somebody who went through the process and somebody who with your unique perspective, really, of the based on your experiences, any parting words of wisdom that you'd like to share?
Well, one thing we haven't talked about is how valuable family is to creating the right context for us to be our best selves. And that very much applies to being our best selves at work. And the idea of building a family at the same time that we're building a business, because Judaism really, is very concerned with our getting married and building families. That's a big part of participating in a lot of the Jewish communities, is building families. And to me, that's been sort of the most inspiring part of going to work, is that, I've got a family to take care of. It's really motivating. And it's always an incredible balance to work, to come home, and have your kids to greet you and have Shabbat with a beautiful family and a community. And so to me, the idea of working hard would have been a huge burden if it weren't for coming back every night to an incredible family, to have a huge dedication to Shabbos and making that like a real otherworldly experience from what I experienced at work. And there's no other system I've ever seen that provides the tools for us to work hard, the motivation for us to work hard, and then the ability to come back and create a space which is really a spiritual space for our family. And I just like to really thank my family for all of their support and sort of that motivation to go out there and work. And so I encourage all of the young listeners to not think that family holds you back from work, hold you back from your dreams. It really is the fuel for achieving your dreams, and it also is the grounding that you need in order to achieve them in a sustainable way, and to pass down your values to your children. There's nothing more satisfying than that.
Beautifully said. I agree 100%. You don't need me to agree, but I do agree. And
Okay.
Chanan, I want to thank you very, very much for taking your time out of your afternoon and sharing it with us.
I'm so glad we got to chat again. And I wish you and your listeners a lot of success, a lot of blessing.
Amen. Thank you so much.
You've just listened to another great episode of Our Tribe, the podcast, brought to you by the Podcast Fellowship and hosted by Rabbi Tovia Kopstein. Tune in each week every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time to hear more great episodes of Our Tribe, the podcast. If you have any suggestions or questions, email us at ourtribe@podcastfellowship.org. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help the tribe thrive.